the meeting for the Planning and Zoning Commission for Litchfield Park for July 13th to order. And it looks like our first order of business is a city center development update from City Engineer Woody Scouten.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. If I can share my screen, I've got a brief presentation, then we'll open it up to questions. Oh, can you see that?
No.
Not quite yet.
You have to be made the presenter.
He is a co-host. We made you
You
a
should be able to
co-host.
share screen.
Okay. There we go. Does that work?
Yep.
Okay. So the first update is the name. So the official new name of the project is Litchfield Square. And that was something that was derived by a group that Pam participated in, along with some other people. And they came up with a couple of different names and presented them to the City Center Working Group, and they chose this one, Litchfield Square. So henceforth to be known as Litchfield Square. And just as a refresher, you hopefully remember the overall master plan. So along the left edge here is North Litchfield Road. Along the south is Wigwam Boulevard, Old Litchfield Road over on the right. Scout Lodge is up here, Fairway Drive. So this is the original plan that was developed by Destination LP back in 2018, 2019, and accepted by the City Council. We've done a little bit of tweaking to it, but it's basically the same plan. We'll talk about phase one improvements tonight, and then I'll talk about the future improvements as well. So the heavy dashed line here is the boundaries of the phase one improvements. And that was the direction that we were given at the outset because we didn't know how successful or what the costs were going to be. So it includes all the improvements on Litchfield Road, including the roundabout, extension of Village Parkway into the city center over to the Desert Avenue alignment, and then the first phase of the park. And the park sits here. If you remember, the park sits right in the middle of the project. And this gives you an idea of the roundabout, the final design that we ended up with. It's a little radical in that it's an oval shape instead of a circle, but that's the design that ADOT has begun to adopt for their roundabouts. And we had the same consultant who works with ADOT design this one. So it's basically two lanes, north and south through the roundabout, and then a single lane around the center of the roundabout. So if you want to make a left turn going north and into Village Parkway, then you're going to be on the curb lane here, the inside lane, and just go around the roundabout and then go into Village Parkway. And then of course it connects with the Village Parkway in the city center itself. We'll also have an entrance point down here at the south end where Honeysuckle Street alignment is. So you can also get in and out at that location, as well as the other connections. The park, we decided to split it up into 4 phases. The first phase would be the Palm Plaza, a restroom over here, a plaza here, the water feature, and then a lawn, event space lawn here, and this curving sidewalk that goes through the middle of it. And this is our clock tower and memorial plaza here. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. This is a future amphitheater and then more lawn space and a playground for kids up there. So the way that we've approached the construction on this project is to hire what's called a CMAR contractor, and that stands for Construction Manager at Risk. And that is a procurement method under the statutes that allows us to select a contractor based on qualifications. That contractor gets involved in a project early and helps with cost estimating and value engineering and ideas to make the project better. So we work together with the CMAR contractor and our engineer to come up with the most cost-effective project. And then when we're ready to start construction, the contractor gives us what's called a GMP, a guaranteed maximum price. So that's a price that will not be exceeded and will most likely cost less because there are things in there like contingencies and allowances and so on. But we know exactly what it's going to cost at the time that is submitted to the city. So we've had guaranteed maximum price, GMP number 1, which was approved by the council at their June meeting. That is about a $3.5 million project. And that is under construction now. They just started this Monday. They moved on to the site and they've started construction. So basically this is to clear the site, get it ready for all of the rest of the construction. We're installing the sanitary sewer system right now. And then when that's finished, we'll do mass grading of most of the site. There's some areas where the city uses some of that land for overflow parking for events in the fall and winter and springtime. So we're not going to touch those at this point, so we can still use those for event parking. And then we also have some very long lead time items like water fittings and things to order. So that's underway. GMP 2 will be presented to the council at their meeting next week. And that is to install water, the water system and the dry utility system. So that's including power, gas, and telecommunications. So Cox and CenturyLink and so on. That GMP will also install the storm drains and a centralized underground stormwater retention system. So all of the stormwater that comes off of the project will be stored, well, not all of it, but most of it will be stored underneath the park, underneath the lawn in the park, and then dry wells will dissipate it into the ground. Next comes GMP number 3, which we expect that's going to start in September of this year, following approval by the council. And this is the one where we start building the streets. So we've got all the utilities in the ground, we've got the grading done, and we're now building the first phase of the park and also building streets. So we're going to be extending Village Parkway, so the latter part of this year, building the roundabout and all the other improvements on Litchfield Road. That work will actually probably start in January, February timeframe. And the reason for that is that Southwest Gas is getting ready to install a 12-inch gas main in Litchfield Road, which is an extension of the project they did in Goodyear a few years ago, if you remember. So we're going to let them get in there, do their installation, and then get out of the way so that we can come in and reconstruct that portion of Litchfield Road. So I mentioned this also build phase 1 of the park. And then GMP 4 would be the rest of the streets. So we've got Loma Avenue, Desert Avenue, Honeysuckle Street, and the connections to Wigwam and Old Litchfield Road. So building the rest of the streets, that will probably start mid next year. And then finishing off the park with the rest of the phases. That's our 20 million that I'm going to talk about in a second. So, but there's a follow-on GMP number 5, which we think will cost about 6 million, and that's doing all of the final touches. What I'm calling final touches. It's the things that we don't need to install right now, but ultimately we want to have things like the clock tower, the memorial items that go into the memorial park, the water feature, some of the major monument signage, and some other things that, the second restroom in the park, things like that that we will need in the future or would like to have in the future, but we'll not get to that until, sometime when the financing, when the council is comfortable that the financing is there to pay for those. So I guess what I'm saying is the overall project is estimated to cost 26 million. The council wants to start out with, we think, we'll see what they say Wednesday night, but we think that they will approve a $15 million bond issue. So let me jump into that. There's a lot of information here, but basically the way that we're going to finance this is the city will sell $15 million in revenue bonds, which is supported by sales tax revenue. And we'll take about $5 million out of the cash reserves. So we have a $20 million construction fund. At the same time, we're going to form a community facilities district. I'll talk about that in a second. And then we will begin selling the 6 parcels to developers through a bid process and a development agreement process. And then as the infrastructure is built and as parcels are developed, in other words, they're sold to developers and they're out of the city's hands, then we can activate the CFD and have the CFD acquire infrastructure from the city. And the way the CFD does that is it sells its own GO bonds, which are supported by a CFD tax against the property. So we have to, that's going to be a kind of a careful dance because we don't want to have the tax be too heavy on the parcels that are developing, but also have generate enough revenue to start paying the city back for the infrastructure, and then the city uses those revenues from the CFD to pay down the $15 million bond issue. So that'll occur probably over a 10-year period, maybe longer, depending on how long it takes to get the parcels under development. And then the additional revenue from parcel sales and from the CFD, acquiring the infrastructure will then be used to pay for GMP5 and finish out the project. And then finally, there's a $3 per 100 assessed valuation tax through the CFD that supports operation and maintenance. And this is really important for the city because, with that park and all the landscaping and the streets and so on, the city's going to have, the Public Works Department is going to have to hire a couple more people, maybe more, to operate and maintain all of that. We're going to have a water feature, some other things that will require restrooms or require additional operation and maintenance. And the CFD tax will pay for those expenses. So the city's not out of pocket. And that's all I have. So I'm just going to open it up for questions and see if I can answer them. Oh.
What do you mentioned there was going to be a clock tower further on and some memorial things. Could you tell us what that's about?
Sure. When this project first came about, the park aspect of it was turned over to the RPG Commission to come up with some recommendations for things to include in the park. And what you see in this, let me go back to that. What you see in this park plan is exactly what they came up with. So the clock tower is in the middle of the Memorial Plaza. The Memorial Plaza will have a Blue Star memorial as well as a peace pole. They specifically asked for those items, maybe something else in the future, but the clock tower would be right in the middle of it. The initial design of the clock tower is about 30 feet tall and would be lighted so that, you know, there would be some effect in the evening, you know, uplit, so that there would, you know, be able to spot it from different points in the park and the Litchfield Square area. There was also somebody came up with the idea of having a carousel located in the middle of this circular plaza. But I think that's an operation and maintenance nightmare, and we probably will end up doing that, but we'll have something there. We've talked to an Air Force representative about perhaps having a history of Luke Air Force Base kind of in the round. So as you walk around that plaza, you get a history of Luke Air Force Base, and they would support that with a grant, but we'll see what happens.
Okay, thank you. Any other commissioners have questions?
Oh, this is Deb Lawrence. Would they consider a history of Litchfield Park?
Yeah, that's one of the purposes of the clock tower. Is it's going to be known as the Paul Litchfield Clock Tower, and we will have some, I don't know if it's plaques, I don't know what to call it, but some type of way of conveying to people at the base of the clock who Paul Litchfield was, and you know, the important what he did in this area with the cotton farming and Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company and all that. There's also an idea about taking some of the walls in the pedestrian area. So let me go back to that real quick. So for example, we're going to have a pedestrian walkway between these two buildings here to connect the parking lot to the park directly. So these walls, what we'd like to do on those walls is also be able to convey some historical information about the city, about Paul Litchfield, Goodyear Tire and Rubber, you know, all of that information could be conveyed there in some kind of a mural is the suggestion that we've gotten. So, you know, it's very important. I think it's very important to utilize this project as a way to inform all of the people who are going to be coming here about Litchfield Park and its history, especially with the founder and everything that he did in this area. Those details haven't been worked out yet. Those are things that we'll work out over the next few years as it develops.
Okay. Any other commissioners have any further questions for Woody Scouten?
Yeah, this is Andrew Frazier. So I'm relatively new to the commission. I've only been on for a couple months. I have a couple questions about the traffic circle on Litchfield Road. What's the design speed for that? So I have a bit of a background in transportation engineering, kind of at a macro level. So what's the design speed for that traffic circle? What does ADOT, MCDOT anticipate it doing to regional traffic patterns? You know, my best guess is it's going to force more traffic over to Dysart. People will avoid Litchfield Road, which I think it's good, but I didn't know if that's been studied yet.
Yeah, the design speed is 20 miles per hour. So to navigate, you know, most traffic circles are designed for a traveling speed of 20 miles per hour. So, and that's one of the reasons. Let me go back to that slide. So that's one of the reasons why the street curves so dramatically coming into. There's two reasons for that. One is to slow people down because they're going to perceive that they're coming into a pretty tight turn. So they're going to, in addition to the signage, we're going to, you know, kind of make them realize that they need to slow down. So they would slow down, and then it also positions them so that they can look to their left and see oncoming traffic at, you know, at a relatively easy turn of the head. And that, you know, makes it a little bit safer entering the roundabout. So, yeah, in terms of traffic capacity, we did a traffic study on both a four-way signalized intersection and the roundabout. and found that both would easily handle the amount of traffic today and the projected volumes. It wasn't one of our stated goals that the traffic circle, the roundabout, might force people to find some other route, but I agree with you. I think that would be a good thing if that happened.
And then one more question. So in the local paper, there was an article about the city center a month or two ago. And one of the pieces at the end discussed a parking structure for 1,300 cars.
Yeah,
That,
yeah, we
that-
wouldn't,
To
yeah,
me, that seems really large.
no, we wouldn't do that all in one structure. That there would probably be 3 or 4 parking garages, and I didn't talk about that tonight, but if this is as successful as we hope it will be, and we end up with somewhere around 400,000 square feet of retail, mixed use, retail, residential, and office, restaurants, and so on, we're going to need around 1,900 parking spaces. We can get about 700, 600 to 700 on the ground, but obviously that's not enough. So that would cause us to have to build parking garages. We're thinking that we would have one in the northwest corner up here on parcel 1, one down here next to Litchfield Road, one over by Wigwam Boulevard, and then one on this parcel 3 that fronts on Old Litchfield Road. Now, that parcel, because the developer of that parcel is probably going to want to take advantage of the views of the park, and of course the retail is going to want to front on not only Desert Avenue here, but also on Old Litchfield Road. What makes sense for this parcel is to have 2 buildings, one fronting on Desert Avenue, one fronting on Old Litchfield Road, and then the parking garage in the middle, so that it looks like part of the same structure. It wouldn't be, a standalone parking garage, in other words. But anyway, that's, we think we're going to need 3 to 4 of those, and they'll be in the range of 3 levels, which, parking garage level is only 11 feet. So they'll be similar in height to a 2-story building that would have retail on the first floor and office or residential on the second.
Sounds like this is down the road a little bit, but one last question on the parking. Has there been discussions on shared parking requirements? So, sharing, 2 spaces per apartment. Those people leave during the day to go to work. Those 2 parking spaces could be shared by the commercial establishments, so that we're, that
Yeah.
just sounds like a lot of parking to be bringing into a small local community.
Mhm.
So, restaurants that operate at night, they don't need parking during the day. So they, vice versa. Has that been discussed at all?
Oh, yeah, you're right on. We have talked about relaxing some of the parking requirements for restaurants because of that very thing, that there will be parking that will be needed by the office workers during the day. But when they leave at 5 o'clock, then all those spaces become available for restaurants and shopping, for retail.
Mhm.
So yes, we have talked quite a bit about how to approach this whole parking scenario. Now, when it comes to reserved parking or partly reserved parking for like condos, that's going to be a discussion that we're going to have with each individual developer, depending on what they are planning to put in their building. If they're going to put condos in there, then we need to have a discussion with them about the overall parking situation and how that's going to work. So,
Woody, if I
so some
may,
of it won't even be, decided until, a year or 2 years down the road.
Woody, if I may kind of piggyback on what you said, of course, for Commissioner Frazier through the chair. As a reminder, the City Center Zoning District contemplated the unique parking needs of the city center, and as Woody Scouten serving as basically the project manager of this large scale project. The city engineer and the city council have wide latitude to approve on a case-by-case basis, a parking demand study to vary from the underlying requirements on a case-by-case basis. So Woody, has a lot of latitude to scrutinize what the parking needs are as this builds out. And the parking garage concept has been on the table since the genesis of this whole project more than 5 years ago, if not longer. So just to give you some contextual background and advisement on the code requirements, there's council has discretion on the parking through Woody.
Thanks.
Are there any other questions for our city engineer?
This is Deb again. Is the intent to screen the parking with trees? I see it on the perimeter, but right where it says like future development, it just looks like the parking garage is exposed. Would the development conceal that, or would you screen it with trees to soften that? I know the same article that you mentioned, Commissioner Fraser, talked about the 3-deck parking, and which seemed a little excessive, or the height restriction. It's interesting, it's only 33 feet high, but I don't know if that's been shared with the public.
Yeah, I don't know if it has either. But, obviously we would adhere to the city's screening requirements for any kind of surface parking lot. When it comes to the parking garages, the effort will be to have them blend architecturally in with the other buildings around them so that it doesn't look like a parking garage.
Right.
And that's, again, that's something that will be worked out with the developers as they bring their projects in. But since we probably won't be building parking garages right off the bat, it will be, be kind of incumbent on the city to make that kind of architectural effort, at the time that we go to build the first parking garage. And there's a lot of architectural things that can be done to the exteriors of the parking garages. So they, a lot of companies and businesses don't do that to their parking garages because they're not required to. But in this case, the city is going to be very sensitive about how the parking garages look, and try to make them look like the buildings around them.
Okay, last call. Any other questions for Woody Scott? Okay, well, thank you, Woody.
All right, you're welcome. Thank you.
At this point, let's move on to the zoning code, item B, the zoning code update. And I believe Mr. Sanks has an update for us.
Good evening, Chairman Leonard, Planning and Zoning Advisory Board members. I wanted to give you an update on where we're at with the zoning code rewrite. Appreciative too of Woody's presentation on the city center. It's really exciting to see that. And it's funny, he's talking about items related to the city center, and in tandem, as you know, we've already done the city center zoning district. And so when we bring up items like parking garages and screening, we contemplated those in the zoning district. And so there's verbiage and design guidelines in place to ensure that developers and the city coordinate together for screening mechanisms and such. So for tonight, so we wanted to give you a brief update. Even as of today, Pam and I were working together with Susan Goodwin, who has been retained on a post-retirement basis as our code guru on the legal counsel side. Certainly Joe Estes, our city attorney, is in someone in concert with her, I imagine, in regards to understanding where we're at with the code rewrite process, which has at points in the past 18 to 24 months taken a bit of a pause as we had to focus on the relatively large impact of the Sun Health project and another priorities such as the city center itself. When we did the zoning district and the destination LP stuff, we kind of took pauses, and then of course COVID hit. So as you know, the code rewrite has been presented to the commission on a number of occasions as a study session item as we've worked through various aspects of it. Oddly enough, Commissioner Faith and O'Connor are our working group luncheon companions that have kind of trudged through some multiple lunches as we try to vet through various details of the zoning code rewrite. So as we rewrite the single family districts and the multifamily, the commercial and the industrial public facilities, and then when we got to the general regulations, we kind of powered through many aspects of the code together. Then we would bring them to you. So it was like we did Pam and I, and then Pam and I plus 2 commissioners as a working group, and then the rest of us all together in a study session. So at this juncture, we've gotten through more or less the entire land use aspect of the code. But most of the stuff that where we work, you know, as the Planning and Zoning Advisory Board, you kind of live in the land use side. And then there's a lot of legalese stuff that's occurring on the periphery that makes sure all its wheels are turning and that we're in compliance with statutory requirements for how we address land use changes and land use decisions. So Susan has been making a lot of progress on those aspects of the code, the sections of the code that we don't reference that often together because we're so focused on what are our setbacks and what's the landscaping and what's the allowed uses. You know, how we do business as a city is also important. And she's been making sure that we're up to date since, gosh, 13 years ago with statutory requirements and how we do business. And there have been some things that have changed. And when we're ready, we'll bring maybe a highlight section of the legalese stuff to you. But for tonight, the last kind of chunk that we really haven't looked too closely at together as a staff plus commission in the study session setting is parking requirements. And before I open up the PowerPoint, I want to tell you why we thought it was important to bring it to you. So there's been, prior to COVID, there was already the gig economy trend towards ride sharing, towards delivery services, multimodal kind of pressures on things in many cities across the country, because us planners talk to other planners and we're involved in associations and we hear all the trends that are occurring through different conferences and seminars about this kind of idea that the need for, let's say, more parking or current parking demands on our primarily for non-residential uses such as commercial, not so much on the manufacturing side, but mostly on the commercial and the restaurants and the personal services side, that the parking demands have started to somewhat decline. Because the reliance upon someone's personal vehicle to do all of their bidding, if you will, in terms of going to get their groceries, going to pick up commodity type retail products, like going to pick up, like groceries or toilet paper, or, even having food delivered to your home. It wasn't that long ago that I don't remember using Uber Eats. And now sometimes I don't want, we didn't want to go out because of COVID. And then sometimes now we don't want to go out because we don't want to get off the couch, right? So we just click on our phone and then our food just shows up and we just pay it through our phone and we're done and we have dinner. I don't have to cook and I don't have to go to the restaurant, but I got the restaurant food. We all know the story. We've been there. So what that's done is that supported all of our brick and mortar restaurants, a lot of our takeout only restaurants, a lot of our drive-through restaurants. So they're enjoying the business of their customers without their customers actually having to physically go and park in a parking lot and enjoy the premise, if you will. So what we're seeing, as you can tell where I'm going with this, is that the need for a personal vehicle to be parked on that property to either purchase a service or a good from it has somewhat diminished with all of these different things happening. I mean, I even have an electric scooter, and if I could drive that thing everywhere, I would, but I'd probably get killed. But it's fun, and for convenience sake, I do use it. So that's just an example. And then, like, for example, during COVID, as you well know, Fry's has the quick pick, or the whatever they call it, where you go and you pull up and they bring your groceries out to your car and you're boom and you're done, right? You don't park and leave your car for an hour and peruse the aisles, although I do enjoy doing that myself too. But all of these reasons and ways in which we are gathering primarily commodity-based goods or food type goods have changed. And so do we still need these giant parking lots, whether they're small parking lots for small facilities or giant parking lots, for example, for Fry's? that's kind of what we wanted to talk to you about. And maybe even if you would like, since we're in a study session forum, I'll go through my PowerPoint to discuss parking requirements. I'm going to show you a comparison between old code and the proposed code, as well as put up Town of Queen Creek, which recently did a massive overhaul of their parking, their entire code actually. They spent a small fortune doing their code. And then the city of Avondale, just as a West Valley kind of benchmark, if you will. So use to use, what do they all require? And then I would like to talk to you about your thoughts on where we see very current trends now in electrical vehicle charging stations. So, you know, maybe get an idea of the commission's temperament or temperature on, should we approach these as a requirement as we electrify vehicles and anticipate, you know, within 10 years, a significant proportion of our vehicles will start to become electrified. Do we want to require electric vehicle charging stations, or do we want to become more, let the market decide, they'll figure it out and install them because their customers want them? We can look at it from both perspectives. And lastly, brief consideration of solar voltaic shade canopy structures over required parking. We have a giant fry sitting in the middle of Litchfield Park, and they have a big real estate division, and they decide every year who's going to get a shade canopy structure. And I'm not aware if and when we would ever be proposed to get one, but if we did, perhaps we should think in advance of what type of development standards we would want for something of that scale, or even if we were to get something in smaller scales for some of our other commercial centers, even the Albertsons or whatever. You never know, but they seem to be not going away, but rather becoming more popular. Based on a variety of incentives and customer demands, tax incentives, and other sorts of things. So without further ado, let me see about my screen share here, and I'll start a slideshow. Give me 1 second. So I'm going to enlarge this, and then I'm going to go to slideshow format. 1 second. Can you see my screen? Great. Okay. So this is obviously just the intro slide. It's really a parking ratio comparison. And for those of you that may be looking at a small screen or a phone, I'm going to apologize in advance for the techie looking chart you're going to see. But this is the parking requirements comparison, and it looks like a giant data dump, I'm sure, on all of you. But what I'd like to do is focus on concepts rather than focus on each and every one of these details. Now, of course, we can share this PowerPoint with you if you'd like to have Pam email you a copy of it. We have it in PDF and PowerPoint format. And this would give you an idea of where we're going. And I'm going to kind of tell you why I put it together and how I did it. So over on the left-hand column, use, that means land use. Like, what are the variety of uses that we're talking about? And keep in mind, I'm focusing primarily on non-residential. I didn't get into that single family, that's pretty static. Multifamily really hasn't changed. What we're talking about is, you know, I like to talk about bars and restaurants. I like to talk about retail and grocery. And a little bit of stuff that's kind of popped up with body shops and car repair. So starting with bars and taverns, I'll tell you, we have a little bit of a unique parking requirement for bars and taverns. And we kind of bounced into this. You may or may not know this, but as recently as the Denny's that came in at Dysart and Camelback, they ended up in a weird corner because they read our code and thought that they needed, if you can see here, one parking space for 50 square feet, but that would exclude all these hallways and restrooms and the storage areas and the outdoor areas, because they're like, oh, we're part of a larger commercial center. Well, they didn't technically have a shared parking agreement with anybody, and there wasn't shared parking across that center. So then they were forced into a more restrictive parking requirement that they couldn't meet. So it took them 8 weeks to hammer out a legal agreement with CubeSmart to share CubeSmart's parking to meet their parking requirement. Now, we thought that that was a little interesting, and in my experience with other codes in other cities, and that's why I'm reflecting upon not just what we require currently, what we're proposing, but what are other cities, what research have they done even recently with the town of Queen Creek adopting their latest zoning ordinance in 2020 and Avondale as late as amendments into 2018? You know, what are they doing a little bit differently? So what we're finding is that our 1 to 50 square foot of parking, mind you, that's 20 spaces for every 1,000 square feet of a restaurant. Let me give you an idea what that turns into. A Raising Cane's is like 3,500 square feet. So to give you an idea, Raising Cane's would be 70 parking spaces, right? That's a lot. You know, especially for even a restaurant that has a drive-through. So we're proposing, you know, we'd like to ask you what your thoughts are, and maybe if you want to share your concerns of, do you find your experience in our current commercial centers, and when you go to the restaurants, if you go to the drive-through, if you go to the Starbucks, are you finding that we have lots of excess parking and we're more or less wasting land, and that could be otherwise developable area or landscaping? Or do you think that we're getting it just right? Or do you see us trending towards an archaic parking code? And so my goal with you as a commission is to kind of gather some of your thoughts on, are we over parking our centers? Fry's has a significant amount of parking, and as you know, is I don't know if I've ever seen the parking lot full. It may have been full. Maybe usually always people say Christmas time or the day before Thanksgiving or something like that. But is it really full? And do you see it trending towards needing to be as, you know, significant of a parking requirement as it is? As you can tell, we require one space for 150 square feet. When you have a 124,000 square foot store like Fry's, 1 to 150 results in like 600 parking spaces. It's like wild. I mean, massive amounts of parking. That parking could otherwise have been used for other things. And what we've seen Fry's Real Estate's division do is, in other jurisdictions where the parking requirements are half of what ours are, they've actually started redeveloping their excess parking lots into more restaurants or more services that the community wants. Some people might think, oh, that's more traffic, or some people might think it's a higher and better use of the land. And it also generates services and, of course, sales tax revenue for the jurisdiction for which it's located in. So those are the sorts of things you might think about it. It's like, well, do we have it right, or do we have really just too much and it's just kind of dead fallow space? You know, again, appreciating all of your input. So I'm looking at retail, which generally is 1 per 300 square feet of square footage. Ours right now is 1 to 200. We're proposing 1 to 300, which is more common with industry standards and more common with other jurisdictions. In basic terms, Litchfield Park requires quite a bit of parking for retail and restaurants. As a commission, would you be willing to relax some of those standards and not require quite as much? Do you find our parking lots have excess parking capacity whenever you're visiting or patronizing our businesses? If not, maybe we should just keep what we've got on the books, but we're finding that the trend is the opposite direction. We have one self-storage facility already operating, and we have one that's likely going to the design review board in August with 900 storage units. And we have potentially a third one coming for the Monument Point as well, a second one at Monument Point. We have no parking requirement whatsoever in the code for self-storage, but we're proposing to add it. A lot of cities actually just simply forget self-storage. It becomes like this, oh my gosh, afterthought, how do I park this thing? Someone needs to drum up an interpretation, which is what we did for CuteSmart. And I drafted a parking interpretation for self-storage based on my experience with the city of Phoenix and some other jurisdictions that have actually called out, you know, a metric. So for every 50 storage units, you need 1 spot. If there's a manager's apartment on site, which is the trend that's generally going away now, where the people get to live in the little apartment and manage the facility, they usually require 1 to 50 plus 2 on site. Now, the one question that always comes up too is, you know, they start to design these sites. What percentage of that parking needs to be outside the security access gates? And what, you know, as a customer, I want to go rent or lease a space or pay my bill. If I don't have a code or I don't have access to get in that gate, where am I going to park? So I proposed a metric of 20% of the required parking to be located outside the access gate. The remaining 80% could be inside the gate, and that's where you park your car and take the boxes out and go put them in your storage unit. I personally, as a consultant, have worked on more than nearly a dozen storage facilities, and that seems to be kind of a metric that works out. it can sometimes end up with a lot of car parking spaces, but it's usually 1 to 50 is about right. You'll see everything in red here. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize I was going to the next slide. Things are in red are really what's new or changed from the old code. You can see in the first column, that's the 2008 code. And the second column is the new, as I call it, 2021 code. We think we may get it adopted by the end of the year. We're working towards that. And then you can see Town of Queen Creek's requirements. Even they forgot self-storage all the way up into 2020. And then City of Avondale is also unspecified. I've worked with them before, and they just basically said, tell us what you need and we'll work with you. But I don't know, I'll finish the presentation. Maybe we can come back to any just free flowing comments from the commissioners if you have any direct input whatsoever on your thoughts on parking in the city. And if you see us trending away from larger ample parking lots to something more compact because of the way we're changing the way we live and obtain our goods and commodities or not. So those are my thoughts on parking, and I wanted to present those to you tonight as we are wrapping up this portion of the draft code. One thing I was going to mention as well is I've been talking to Woody and a bit on the code enforcement side, and I understand that Caliber Collision out at I won't get too specific, but they heavily park their property. Like they've got a really good business going out there, and I guess they're parking on the public street and they don't have enough parking spaces. So my understanding right now is that auto body repair parking needs are perhaps more significant than we had anticipated, or at least what was even in the code. And our current code is actually kind of unspecified. We have this idea of like commercial parking. It's like this really big basket, right? But not all commercial is the same. So we had done some research and initially thought, okay, we found some code that was like really thinking about it. Body shop heavy, like heavy stuff is like when you're pulling engines and you're doing body work, right? So we would say, well, those cars are likely to stay in the bay longer, and your churn is perhaps a bit less frequent during the course of the day, so your customers aren't churning with it, right? With the higher parking demand. So maybe we need 2 spaces per service bay plus 1 per 150 square feet of office. And office or lobby, or what it's like when you go there, you can wait or you can go. With light, that's more of your oil change and your tire shop and those sorts of things, light repair. And those usually have a little bit more customer churn. So we would anticipate maybe needing 3 spaces per service bay because of the volume of customers cycling through a site when there's faster, more frequent repairs. Something to consider. We think that we have the uses called out in the land use list. So all of the uses that are in the left column under use are called out in the land use matrix of the new code specifically. So correspondingly, we must identify parking requirements for all of our permitted uses, which is what we don't currently have in our old code. So there's a lot of ambiguity between, we have all these uses allowed, but we don't have parking requirements for all the uses that are listed. And then we got to kind of work with it. So Pam and I have had to deal with that on several occasions. And so the intention here is, as part of the code rewrite, is tighten it up. Here's our allowed uses, and this is the parking that you need for those uses. And this is how we identified what we think the parking needs should be. So next slide will be reasons for parking reduction considerations from the current ratios as identified, and we talked about. Thoughts on overparked sites leading to empty parking lots? Lots of kind of wasted Litchfield Park land, right? Do we feel like we've got acres of parking that's underutilized that could be a higher and better use in our city? When you need more parking, it's like cutting the pie. You can only cut the pie so many ways. If it's in the parking lot, it's not in the building. So you're getting less building area, which means perhaps less services, perhaps less sales tax revenues, of which we're heavily reliant upon. It means reduced landscape area. We see multimodal methods of transportation increasing. Some people may choose, and rather than have 2 cars, I'm just gonna have 1 car and I can take an Uber when I need it. Or my grandmother takes Uber because she doesn't want to drive anymore. Or you have it. Bikes, electric scooters, lots of people are getting around in different ways. And we don't see the trend reversing. We see the trend increasing. As stated before, earlier in my presentation in the intro, we see the growth in pickup and delivery services of all types. So people that have gotten used to staying home because of COVID, they do want to go back out to eat. They do want to be involved in their community, but they've also developed new habits and new ways of living. And as many of the studies that I've read is that those services are going to be here to stay. Now, whether they're leveraged as much as they were during COVID or not, maybe not. But my understanding is that people have options that were thrown to them in the last 18 months, and they're going to continue to use those options, which reduces reliance upon their personal vehicle to go and get those goods and services. And it all comes down to smart, balanced land use policies. I mean, we can get, into broader scope concepts of let's reduce some pavement. If we reduce our parking area, we have less parking lot lighting, which gives us a little bit more dark sky. It gives us a little bit less residual heat in the evenings. Those sorts of larger scope things. That's more of broad planning concepts that I've looked at. You see in a lot of seminars and things like that. But the more direct impact that most people would realize is, we can do more with our land if we're not needing so much of it for a parking space. So just ideas to think about why we would consider possibly relaxing some of our parking requirements from now. And mind you, much of our parking requirements were actually carryovers in 2008 from, these are like 30-year-old parking requirements. A lot of this stuff has been around since incorporation. What other cities are also doing too to kind of alleviate and accommodate for this kind of dynamic land use landscape that we're in is allowing the zoning administrator, who in the city of Litchfield Park defers to the city manager or his or her designee. So at this time, for example, the zoning administrator would be Matthew, city manager, but he would likely rely upon someone such as Pam, myself, or Woody to review items that need to go and get his clearance. So we would suggest that as other cities are doing, that there's a provision in the code to allow up to a 10% reduction of required parking through a parking justification statement or narrative by an applicant if they have a reasonable argument that the zoning administrator could support. Just to give us a little bit of wiggle or leeway room for special projects that have unique needs. And if they don't get the answer that they want, they can always appeal it and there's procedures for that. We may also want to consider parking maximums. Other jurisdictions like Mesa and even in Avondale have parking maximums. So if I say you need to have 20 parking spaces and you want to give me 40 because you don't want to do anything else with that property, right now they theoretically could do that. But do we want people providing double the parking because they don't want to pay for landscaping or they just want it or for whatever reason? Do we want to limit or put a maximum on parking based on our requirements? Just something to throw out there. We see a trend in jurisdictions trying to set limits on excess parking over what's required because, well, it's more pavement. So is that something that we want? For any concerns about very unique uses that aren't black and white in the zoning code, those still will remain as if they're unspecified. The zoning administrator, the city manager would determine what the parking requirements are. And just so you know, that would be consistent with what's in the current code. And as I briefly stated earlier with Woody's segue, gave me a segue, the city center zoning district, everybody keeps talking about parking, and through the chair, Commissioner Frazier, you mentioned, about the article that was in the paper. I read the article. There's a little concern about, are these parking garages and all this parking downtown, are we going to generate traffic? City center is very unique, and it's very difficult to write like a blanket statement of this is what's the requirement going to be for parking for, as the crystal ball of what uses end up actually occurring there over the build out occur. We would like to defer each project and keep it as each project will require a parking demand study. And the person such as Woody as a development services director, also known as a city engineer at this time, has the wherewithal and knowledge to understand a parking demand study. And then the next project comes in and contemplates the prior parking demand study so that we always know how we're tracking in terms of what we need and what's our inventory and what a developer or what the city needs to provide as a solution, if that makes sense. So in case we were to get sidelined in our conversation tonight in regards to the city center zoning district, I wanted the commission to know that our intention at this time is not to establish parking district standards special for city center through the code rewrite. Our intention is to leave it as a parking demand study item that goes through Woody and or that position of Woody's, and then ultimately through city council for special approval because they control the property. And it's very unique. So that's a lot of stuff about parking. Let me talk about electric vehicle requirements. These are popping up all over the place. Slowly in Arizona, surprisingly, but they are popping up. In California and other states that have a somewhat more aggressive electric vehicle requirements for car manufacturers, they also have more aggressive requirements for charging stations. Now, charging stations can be accomplished through a variety of installation means. They can be required by the city to make the developer figure it out, and they figure out where they're going to put them, or they leave it up to the market to decide. A hotel goes in, they've got guests that drove 200 miles and they want to park that car overnight and stay the night as a guest. A hotel would be a logical location that's going to want to provide charging stations for someone's Tesla, right? I mean, the person's going to get up and drive in the morning. If they don't have a place to plug in, they're not going to be able to go anywhere. Or, I'm going to go inside Fry's and I want to shop for an hour. And if I shop for an hour, I can get a 40% charge on my car before I go drive all over the valley after that, or whatever I'm doing. Consideration, if we might want to start to put at least something in the code that says that we can even do it as a recommendation. That, projects, for example, commercial projects, or multifamily projects where people have apartments and they don't have ease of access to charging stations. A lot of these apartment complexes, there's not a single charging station. How are these people going to buy electric vehicles and then also rent an apartment or even live in a condo if they don't have a garage with their condo? Those sorts of things, do we want to get in front of this knowing that maybe upwards of 50% of our car sales may be electrified by 2030 or 2040? And then all we've got is a bunch of gas stations and then charging stations wherever they randomly fall? Or as a city, do we want to provide some direction to development? And again, maybe picking your brains. I don't know who on the commission here may actually have an electric vehicle or the advisory board or know someone with an electric vehicle, but in my research on EV charging, one of the largest senses of, let's say, concern or anxiety amongst electric vehicle owners is how and when they can ensure their car is charged, basically their version of a fill-up, right? Not every day is a perfect commute to work and back home and I plug it in my garage. Where can I get a 30% up on my charge so I can continue with the rest of my day? Or surprisingly, like with some new codes I've read, I'm pouring through the codes looking for, what do they say about electric charging, and they're silent. And I wonder, did they have the conversation when they rewrote their code? Did they think, we're not ready? We don't want these things can be expensive. Tens of thousands of dollars to install one. Who's paying for the electric bill? Does somebody swipe a credit card, or does the commercial place pay for it, etc.? So just an idea to open that up. Last topic. Solar voltaic shade canopy parking standards. So this is one of many Fry's in the valley that have their real estate division approved and constructed a massive solar voltaic shade canopy over a great portion of their required parking. If you've ever had the chance to go to one of these fries, you'll see people circling about trying to grab one of the spots that's shaded and avoid the ones that are not shaded. Now they do not protect you from the rain, I found out, because the rain seeps through all those panels and gets you on your way in the store. But it does help if you can navigate around the rain that's falling through the panels because they're open. But the shade is great, especially when your car's baking and it's 117 out. So in the event that Fry's Real Estate Division were to decide that our Fry's would be a good candidate for a shade canopy structure, or Albertsons would initiate a program, or City Center might want to do something, or Sun Health, or whoever. You never know. Small scale, large scale. I wanted to talk to you about my experience with shade canopy parking standards. So I was looking at one of the Fry's, and this is on behalf of private development. Fry's had a bunch of excess parking, and they had like 125 spots more than the city of Phoenix required. So 12 years ago, no, I'm sorry, 8 years ago, Fry's came in and said, this location, we want to put the shade structure for the solar panels. We want to make sure that you're not going to count against us on lot coverage. Because if you count the canopy against lot coverage, this massive structure, maybe we can make it all work with what's currently out there. But if we want to, let's say we have 120 extra spots, and I want to take that 120 extra spots and say, you know what, I'm going to create a parcel and I'm going to sell it to Taco Bell. And Taco Bell is going to build a restaurant. And then we realize, well, you don't have any lot coverage left if we include the shade canopy. So with that shade canopy, would we be disincentivizing, is that the word, the installation of solar canopies for shade if we penalize the owner or the developer on their lot coverage requirements and say, you know what, you met your lot coverage, you can't do anything else with your property now? Or would we kind of exempt them from lot coverage with solar canopies? And what City of Phoenix did is they wrote an interpretation, which they write lots of, that they considered, although that it's technically, it obviously is a structure, they interpreted it as a piece of equipment. And that way they worked around the whole concern about maxing out the lot coverage, and they were further able to develop the rest of the commercial property with that it had excess parking, and you know, they could build a sit-down restaurant or more retail and do higher and better uses of the property. From the staff perspective, I would encourage the commission to consider, if we decide to put language in the code, that we consider that we encourage solar canopies, if you think that we should, presuming that they're for a good purpose, they provide shade and also, you know, give us electricity from the sun, that we don't penalize the property owner in terms of the development standards. But we also still need to make sure that they meet setback requirements, so we're not building these giant things right on the property line. So that's one of the items that I wanted to bring forward to you now as a current development trend that didn't exist when we wrote the last code, you know, 13 years ago. But it is now a development trend that we should consider now. So really on your plate today for open discussion is, do you think we should relax some of our parking standards for things like grocery stores and restaurants and bars? Do you think that we should consider either suggesting or requiring electric vehicle charging stations for non-residential and multifamily residential development? And 3, would you support staff's direction in providing standards for solar canopy shade structures over required parking that don't perhaps are not, you know, represent onerous like lot coverage for the developer or the landowner? So those are really the 3 items. And with that, I'd be happy to answer questions, flip back to the slides. It's a lot to digest, but you know, I try to get the most I can out of your time when we have the opportunity. And so I welcome comment.
Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Sanks? concerning his comments on the zoning code updates for parking.
Deb Lawrence, I just wanted to make a comment that our next car probably will be a electric car or hybrid of some kind. I think that's what we want to consider. We're a one-car family, and that's the way we're looking at our future transportation. Bicycles, we bicycle to downtown Litchfield Park, and I assume that when you say city center, you mean Litchfield Square.
Well, through the chair, Commissioner Lawrence, a bad old habit. I've been saying city center for so long. I just need just a moment to change.
You need to do a search and a find and replace and a lot of documents to change.
I know. Well, the zoning ordinance itself, the marketing name, of course, is Litchfield Square. The zoning district is city center. So.
Well, I am intrigued with the electric charging stations. I have a friend that when they come see us from Los Angeles, they specifically look at restaurants and stops along the way where they can charge, and they spend a minimum of an hour either eating or shopping or whatever. So I think there is definitely an advantage to the retailers and restaurants. If we have that near the restaurant, maybe they participate in some of the cost or whatever. I do like also the idea of the solar, whether it's on a shade cover, which seems to make a lot of sense. And I also look for shade in a parking lot, very hard to find. But if you go down Pebble Creek Parkway, there's a couple stores down there. They have trees in the parking lot, and I will go right against the birds that may potentially poo on my car to get a shady spot on a 115-degree day. So I think these are all really good points that you've brought out, and certainly worthy of consideration.
Thank you, Commissioner Lawrence. Commissioner Alvey, did you have a question or a comment?
I agree with Deb. Basically, my husband and I, we own two vehicles one is considered a hybrid, so it's not a plug-in vehicle. The second vehicle we do plug in, however, you add gasoline to it. And the biggest problem with us taking that particular vehicle on any long distance trips or anywhere is because we know there will not be places to plug it in. So we primarily just use that for around town. We don't go long distances. And I think we do need to be proactive as a city regarding this, because whether anybody likes it or not, the car manufacturers are being required basically to manufacture more of the electric vehicles. And I think that we need to start taking action to provide charging stations for those who are going to have these vehicles. And as far as the solar goes, I agree with that too. I know that with technology and the way that it's advancing as quickly as it is now, I know that within a year or two, the solar panels that are on those Fry's, parking lot structures, they are already outdated. However, they still provide shade. So even if they are somewhat outdated and not providing as much energy as they otherwise could, they still, they have a dual purpose. And I think that it would be a good idea to look into having those near some of our commercial structures. As far as like the parking situation goes, I know that down in Queen Creek, at least around the plaza down there, parking can be kind of a nightmare, especially in the winter time. And I know that we're looking at this as a whole and probably not at specific times of the year, but obviously out here all over the state of Arizona, parking and the number of people who are here is much higher in the winter versus the summertime. Granted, I mean, right now we've got so many people moving into the state, it's kind of crazy, but there is a waste in some parking space, like over at our Fry's over here. There's a ton of space. I mean, just to the east of the Fry's shopping center, there's a lot of wasted parking spaces over there that could have been used for something else. So I think that it also would be important to kind of look at what the property is and what the commercial design they present to the community, and that a fast food restaurant that has a drive-through, they're not going to need as many parking places as a regular sit-down restaurant. So we probably could even cut back fast food restaurant parking even lower than what might be considered. And I don't know how you could do that, Jason, other than kind of going on a piece by piece and business by business look at how to analyze it and how to handle the situation. But I mean, it does make a lot more sense to utilize space more efficiently and effectively. I think that's all I've got to say.
Through the chair and Commissioner Alvey, thank you. I'll take note of that. Specifically, I noted we do, just so you may recall the historical reference with Fry's. The site planning discussions amongst staff and Fry's, they did balk at the parking requirements of 1 to 150, which is more than double their own industry standard for what they believe they need. So that's why we have so much parking for Fry's. They're basically barely making their minimum based on our requirements. That's why there's so much parking at Fry's. So that's the reason I kind of highlighted grocery, is so that you would know that.
Yes.
So if we change the parking requirements, there is a potential for future development of their property to use some of their parking area for redevelopment if they so choose, if we were to relax the parking requirement, just as an example of what could occur in 5 or 10 years. And their real estate department has actively been doing that with their sites.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Sanks?
Yeah, this is Andrew Frazier. In my time, so I am fully supportive of anything that makes parking requirements more restrictive. In my time at ASU, I spent the better part of 2 years working on, deeply in the weeds with parking requirements, the history of parking requirements. I worked directly with Donald Shoup. Jason, you're a planner, so I don't know if you know Donald Shoup at all. So, parking maximums, shared parking requirements. I think those are great ideas. We are a suburb, so, we do not have high capacity transit out here. We have some other, I would go a lot farther if we were in Central Phoenix, where they have other options, multimodal options. Here we're limited to bikes, electric scooters, golf carts, and cars for the most part. So, but shared parking requirements, I think, are a good way to go. Looking at Fry's, I think everybody can see that there's too much parking there, and anything we could do to make parking requirements less onerous and less asphalt, I think, is a good thing. As far as the EV charging, looking at, within the context of the city center or Litchfield Square, I think it's a good idea to maybe consider making those requirements, particularly for the multifamily buildings. I mean, that in what that looks like graphically, those are going to be some high-end apartments. I imagine the people that those apartments are going to attract are going to be people that own EVs. So, I think building that into the requirements for those multifamily buildings is something that we should think about. On the solar side, I think the largest, or, the main issue that I heard you talk about is the lot coverage allowance. I would support, not considering a shade canopy provided by solar to count against that lot coverage. I think we shouldn't have requirements that restrict people from, these dual benefit things like a solar shade canopy.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Frazier. Any other comments, or are we ready to move on to the next item? Okay, hearing none, let's move on to item C, which is the Design Review Board of Adjustment update. And Commissioner O'Connor is our liaison to the DRB. I don't know if he's with us tonight. I think at the beginning of the meeting was not here. Is Commissioner?
I am on now. Sorry, I'm late.
There you go. Okay, good. Commissioner, I'll turn that over to you. Did you want to talk about any of those, or did we want to simply, the update is there for people to review if they want?
Yeah, I would say the update's there. If there's any questions, I'm more than happy to answer.
Any questions for Commissioner O'Connor?
This is Deb. I noticed that a number of them are about the choosing colors that are outside the color palette. Is it time to revisit the color palette and maybe save everyone a little time and effort? Just a thought. And then the other thing that was on my mind about this, which is mentioned on this, is under the Board of Adjustment, is the residents at 14044 West Green Tree South. And I know I sat in on both meetings in June 3rd and July 3rd. And it was interesting that they said that they proceeded without a building permit. And I'm just wondering if we make that clear enough that, and maybe the Litchfield Greens Homeowners Association needs to make that much clearer, that you need a building permit, you need approval before you start a structure. You get very far, get far down the road as these people did, and it's a hardship and expense for them, and they, people should have their ducks in a row. But I just wonder if we have done enough to clarify that before proceeding with any of these issues, you should take this before the Design Review Board, Board of Adjustment, and visit the city, look into getting a building permit, or see if it's required.
Commissioner Lawrence, Pam, is that something that you would want to comment on as to the procedure for applicants?
A building permit is required. It's in our code. Design review is required, but perhaps you're right. We could put something in the city newsletter and try to get the word out. There was some language on the city's building department site that stated, it was a little bit confusing, and one of the applicants did confuse that language on whether they didn't need a permit, so they thought they didn't need design review approval, and therefore they didn't look into the setback requirements. So I agree. I think we need to get the word out and let people know let people know what's required by the city. And we can look into that.
Okay, thank you, Pam. Any other questions for Commissioner O'Connor or staff concerning any of the design review? Okay, I'll make a real quick comment on the issue of the color palette. Interestingly enough, there's something like, 100 or 150 colors for primary and a smaller amount of trim. And yet we still have people that manage to find something that is not on the color palette, which is kind of interesting. Some of the brighter colors are not on the palette. So I think we're hoping to try to get something there that would maybe make it easier for staff to approve. But the two that came up, one was a very bright orange color, and the other one was one where somebody wanted to paint the entire house a very dark color, where the dark color normally might have been the trim color. And that got approved with the understanding that the trim had to be a lighter color if they were going to do that. So there are plenty of options if people want those, but there's every now and then you get somebody that just really has their heart set on a different color, and it ends up coming to design review. Most of the time we don't see that many color issues. So, okay, any other comments, questions about?
Could I just add to that, Dave?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I would just say too, I think there's, Pam could speak to it too. There's a lot of administrative approvals that they can, approve that doesn't even come to us. that we obviously do not see. And, I think staff does a good job of whenever it's in the palette, they're able to approve that and we don't even see it. So
Right, I agree. Okay, moving on then to, let's see here, topics for referral to city council. Are there any topics that we should refer to city council? Okay, hearing none, let's move on to minutes. Item E, possible approval of the minutes of the May 11th, 2021 meeting.
This is Deb. I just saw one correction. It's just a typo. It's under 2, business, A, zoning code update, first bullet. And the word in the second line should be or instead of our.
Okay,
So whether it's built within the building footprint or outside of it.
okay. Would you like to make a motion to approve the minutes with that correction?
I move to approve the minutes of the May 11th, 2021 Planning and Zoning Commission meeting as corrected.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor of approving the minutes as corrected, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the minutes are approved. Moving on, staff report on current events.
Thank you, Chair, board members. I'll keep it brief. I know I've chatted your ear off tonight on the study session items. Just some progress being made in regards to development. Sun Health is proceeding, as you know, with ongoing construction of the first phases of the Rancho La Loma project. I believe they've got numerous permits pulled. Of course, Mary would have the latest, she's not with us tonight, from building. We have a 900 unit self-storage facility that's anticipated to go to the design review board in August. We've received the resubmittal for that project. It will be a 3-story facility located on El Mirage, so at Monument Point. And we've had a lot of interest lately in other developments than Monument Point. It seems to be kind of there's a lot of prospective development in regards to discovery meetings and pre-apps with potential developers. I've already given you the update on the zoning code update. Woody gave you the update on the city centers. I believe that is all for now, unless Pam, do you have any other items that you can recall that we should bring up to the commission?
No, I think you've covered everything.
Okay, that's all.
Okay, moving on to commissioners' reports on current events. Do any of the commissioners have any report on any current event? Okay, hearing none.
Hey, Chair, I don't know if you'd call COVID or post-COVID a current event, but I know that we have not been meeting in person for quite a while. Is there a time frame for resuming meetings in person, or will we be continuing on Zoom? And just curious if it would encourage more of the public to be involved, if we were meeting at the library again, or just curious how we.
On that.
Yes.
I'm outside right now because my whole family has COVID.
Oh, no.
So it hasn't gone away.
Oh,
Oh my gosh, sorry, that's crazy. I'm so
Oh,
sorry.
my.
Yeah, my 2 kids and husband, they all have COVID. So it hasn't gone away yet. And my husband and I, actually, we were both vaccinated. My husband probably would have been on a ventilator if he hadn't been vaccinated. So I'm thankful that we were, but it's still around. It is still around. So we might want to hold off on that, like maybe a couple more months anyway.
Okay, asked and
Well,
answered.
it is on the next council agenda to consider returning to in-person meetings in September. So they'll be deciding that at their upcoming meeting. But maybe we'll tell them about you, Commissioner Alvey, your
Yeah.
family.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Okay,
I
thank you.
am too, sorry.
Any other commissioners' reports? Okay, hearing none. The remaining item is adjournment. Is there a motion to adjourn?
There's a finger.
Motion to
Hey,
adjourn.
can I make a comment? Just so everybody knows, for whatever reason on my screen, on any given meeting, I can only see about half of your smiling faces. So if somebody moves, and sometimes they pop into the screen, so feel free if on anything to just go ahead and sound out. I will not be offended unless you're talking over somebody. So I'm not
Are
sure.
you-
how
David, are
that-
you using the gallery view? You can change.
I have no idea. I'm using
Okay.
the one that works. And unfortunately for me, when I start punching buttons where I don't know what they do,
Okay.
in the early days of all of this, I was famous for just being lost in the weeds where it would take me 10 minutes to find my way back. So if it's working, I
Okay.
don't touch anything. So again, if anybody's late coming to the meeting, it would be helpful to me, once they're on board, is to just take a moment and say they're signing in, and then that way it gives me a better feel for who's here and, who's not. But, so anyway, someone wanted to make a motion to adjourn before I launched into my speech there. So I think we had a motion to adjourn. Was there a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion. We have a second to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Hearing none, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.